And I think it has been prompted to some extent by the surge in ransomware payments during the COVID period. And so this is the OFAC sanctions, which is the U.S. Department of Treasury, the Office of Foreign Assets Control. So OFAC. And
Yes.
the sanctions, yes. So basically prohibits U.S. persons from engaging in transactions directly or indirectly with individuals or entities on the sanction list, and normally covers countries such as Iran or North Korea, amongst others. And breaching such or making such ransomware payments to these banned individuals and regions could result in fines for up to $1 million. And for our listeners who are in the financial services sector and familiar with anti-money laundering and bribery and corruption and other compliance-related regulations, OFAC sanctions are not new. But for our listeners who are not in the sector or familiar with such regulations, why are these OFAC sanctions in US important, and what are the implications for them?
Okay, well, I think they're important because a lot of companies, when faced with the loss of major business because their assets are basically frozen by these encryption schemes that result in these ransomware requests, I think there is a tendency in some cases after they've kind of analyzed their options to want to pay. And what the OFAC has done, and as you pointed out, through an advisory they issued last year on October 1st, they tried to clarify their position on these payments. And obviously, the United States government wants to discourage ransomware payments because the whole business model of ransomware is premised on the fact that people will pay. And more people have been paying recently, which has made it a very lucrative business, which makes it even more popular to demand ransomware of even more people. So they're trying to slow this vicious cycle. And so, as you pointed out, at least in the criminal prosecution, you can face up to $1 million fine and 20 years imprisonment per violation. There's also civil penalties that could be alternatively imposed, and those range a little over $300,000 per violation. And at least in the civil penalty arena, it's based on strict liability. And strict liability means that even if you did your due diligence and you did not believe you were paying these ransomware payments to a sanctioned entity, if the OFAC determined later that it was a sanctioned entity, you could still be held liable, which is enough to give a lot of people, cause for pause. And they've basically set up three criteria. The first one is you can't make payments to addresses that OFAC has identified as belonging to sanctioned individuals. The second is that you can't make payments to addresses connected to ransomware strains whose creators have been sanctioned by OFAC. And the third is you can't make payments to addresses connected to ransomware strains associated with cyber criminals in heavily sanctioned jurisdictions, which, as you said, includes Iran and North Korea.
So Rick, we have come to the end of our podcast. So thank you so much for your time in sharing with us the highlights of law cases and regulations in recent years and some takeaways from these developments. And for our listeners in cybersecurity who are not in the legal profession, I think they should be able to walk away and take away some areas to be aware of when faced with a cyber incident, whether it's ransomware or other cyber breach situations. So thank you so much for your time today, Rick.
And thank you very much, Jane. Also, I just wanted to mention too, we talked a lot about ransomware payments and whether you might be able to recover it or not. I think, one thing that I would just mention in closing is that in many cases, if you make the payment, you may not even get the keys to begin with. Even if you get the keys, you may not get all the keys, so you may only be able to recover part of your data. So there's all sorts of additional risk questions that we didn't address directly, but those are certainly other factors. But thank you very much, Jane. I really enjoyed it, and thank you very much.